Okay, I welcome you all here to Atlanta. I hope the weather didn't mess with too many of you on the way in. My job first today is to talk about DataFlex 2017, 19.0, whatever you want to call it, but basically look at the big picture of what's going on in the product, what we've worked hard to bring to you, and what you can do with it. It's interesting, a lot of times we've been around so long that we tend to forget why we use DataFlex, what has brought us here, what has kept us here. And it's pretty, you can kind of sum it up by how many people were in the one-day web app training on Tuesday? A whole bunch of you out there. It's something that we do on a regular basis because it's a great course. And if you've ever been in it, or if you were in it the other day, this is what you did. You went in there, and in the day, you created a workspace. You connected to a complex SQL database. You created a set of business rules. You created a mobile application. And not just a tiny little one. It was a really nice one. It was good looking, responsive, had all these navigationally contextual views. I mean, it just was wonderful things, swipe controls, the whole 9 yards. And then after lunch, you used the power of SQL to create a view and hook that all into all the different tables to give you a full search engine into that data. And you did it all in a matter of hours. And in under probably a couple hundred lines of actually typed code. Most of the code that was in the application was generated for you by wizards and all those other good things. And that was just for the web. If we'd had a few more hours, we could have done another app for the desktop. We could have had a browser app. Basically, that's why we use DataFlex, because we can do all of those things. You saw that diagram that Chip had up on his slide that talked about the web. You're going to mess with me now, too, huh? Sorry. So you saw it had the web on there. It had Windows apps. It had web services. And that's one of the things that we tend to forget about are web services. Web services are your gateway to everything else that maybe we don't do. It's also the complete underpinnings of how web apps work, but we'll talk more about that in the next couple of days. So you've got all of these aspects into that same engine of business rules and database access, and that's why we use DataFlex. So before we talk about 19, I want to talk a little bit about 18 because, as we all know, it's the cumulative effect that counts. It's not that first drink that Fern buys you at the bar. It's the 5th or 6th one that really gets you going. So let's look back real quick at what we did in 18.0, because if you haven't kept up to date or you've looked away for a while and you're looking back, there's some really awesome stuff that's been going on for the past couple of years that is the cumulative effect is what really gets you going. In 18.0, we rebranded the product. In the web framework has basically now come into its 3rd generation. And it's really robust. This is what brings in the mobile apps and browser apps together. So in 18.0, we had version 2 of the web framework. We brought in a lot of different new controls. In Windows, there were new classes. In the studio started to get much more functional, especially along the area of SQL. We started really bringing in some high-performance changes to the DDs, bringing in SQL filtering. Client web services got more robust so that you could attach to more things out there. We've got the whole Internet of Things going on, and we need to be able to not just have a good product, but connect everywhere else. In 18.1, the mobile framework came in. Complex web properties were introduced. Again, the studio got even better. The web designer came in. Big performance improvements in DDs once again. Connectivity, we started taking better advantage of what SQL as a platform was giving us. All of this stuff is building and building and building. A lot of bug fixes and improvements suggested by you in 18.2. Again, more version 2 of the web framework. Now that we had mobile in, we got all of the feedback. We saw what was happening out in the mobile industry, and we, again, iterated that technology to make it even more robust. Windows 10 support, bringing in new controls, the studio, getting better and better. It just kept building and building. And so now we have 19.0. In 19.0, when you look at what the highlights are, every revision has everything in nooks and crannies. There's little improvements that'll kind of surprise you. But these are the headlines: connectivity, managed connections, and improved index support. We're going to talk a lot about that. The Windows framework, making Windows applications look and perform better on high DPI resolution screens, a little bit of alternative MDI look. The Studio, Database Builder, Database Explorer all have a brand new look and feel. The web framework, more server properties that, again, trying to make sure that we make things as efficient as possible, put the tools that you need in your hands, new controls, web server, JSON, it's all in there. So let's talk real quick about connectivity. As Chip said, this is kind of like one of the big headlines of what we're doing in 19.0, and this is what we set out when we started. These were our goals. We wanted to make sure that we took this concept of connection IDs that's actually been there for quite a long time, but we made it more pervasive into the product. We wanted all the tools to support its use. We wanted the applications to be easier to work with because of them. So we brought in connection IDs. We wanted to make sure that we could take best advantage of the indexing that SQL gives you, improve the flow of development when you're working in the SQL world, improve the login process, make, when things change, and they always change, your application changes, the database server changes, your customers' needs change. So we wanted to make it more responsive to change, not just from a responsive application, but when things happen out in the database, how do you bring that and reflect it in your application without having to go through a lot of coding or things like that. So everything working together as things change no matter where they are. And of course, we had to do this all without breaking any of your old stuff. And I think we actually did a pretty good job of that. So again, these are the stars of the connectivity show, and we're going to have a lot of different sessions about them. Managed connections and index improvements, a lot of talk over the next couple of days. Today, we're going to have John introduce managed connections to you formally. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you bring them into your applications. Tomorrow, we're going to look at that conversion connection when things change on the back end, and then also the indexing part. John and I are having a lot of fun showing off the new baby. We're here, we've been doing training for the past couple of days. We've got sessions for the next couple of days. But one of the people I wanted to talk about is there is a wider team, and one of the key players on that team is Martin over at Data Access Europe. He is Mr. Driver. He's the guy that really starts, everything starts when you're connecting to SQL. It starts with the driver that gets you there. So if you see him over in Europe and you happen to have a chance to buy the man a beer, buy him two. He's a big gentleman. And if you see him on the forums answering questions, he's always in there answering questions, especially in the beta forum, trying to make sure that the changes that we're making really are working well, depending upon whether you're in SQL or DB2 or whatever. Interact with him on the forum. He's really, really helpful, and he's doing a great job. You're doing it again. Thank you. All right, so those are the stars. But there's a whole lot more to the connectivity improvements. So, as they talk about in the Oscars, the nominees for best connectivity features in a supporting role are working with SQL at every level, from the drivers up through the packages and the language, up through the tools. You look at what it is, and it's everywhere through the tools, integrated and efficient. I was going to say, bigger, faster, everywhere, but marketing decided they wanted to use that as the tagline, so I couldn't use it in my slides. But that's what it is. It's really bigger, faster, everywhere. And that's what we've done with SQL. The environment management, you have lots of different server revisions out there. You have lots of different Microsoft clients. They're all trying to talk together. You want to be able to make sure that in your customer environment, you have better control over that. So we've given you new features to set the minimum client version that you need to have and make sure that they match with the server that it's connecting to. Updated type mapping, restructure control. One of the things that you don't want to do accidentally is you're in the studio, and it's wonderful that you can have access to all of the aspects of what's going on at the server, but you don't want maybe a new guy to all of a sudden go click and add a new index that forces a restructure out at your database. Well, now you can protect against that. You can just say, I don't want any changes being made. You can make a change, but only to the DataFlex side, the INT file, or you can change the whole thing, I don't care. It's just a test database. So you've got that level of control. The ability to switch on the fly at runtime between either databases on the same server or even databases on different servers. So you've got the new default database and redirect ID connect string. Support for SQL Server 2016 and all the latest Microsoft clients, including what's the latest for 2016 is I think the ODBC client 13. I think they skipped 12 and went from 11 to 13. But all of those pieces are in there. So that's with connectivity, and like I said, we've got a lot of more sessions on that over the next couple of days. The Windows framework has not gone unaided. And what we've done in here, and John Van Houten is going to be talking about this, one of the things that's happening more and more is you've got these packed high-resolution screens everywhere. And so we needed to have better high DPI support in the whole product. We found that as things got smaller, you wanted to change the resolution and say, I'm not going to run it 100 anymore. I'm going to run it 125 or 150 because it's got this amazing new screen on it. And then all of a sudden, things got a little blurry, and the icons weren't looking good, and it just wasn't functioning well in a high DPI environment. Well, we've addressed that, brought in a whole new look and feel with the flat style icons, and also bringing in an alternative to MDI in Windows. I'm just going to mention this real quick, but John's going to talk about it later. As you can see, in Windows 10, you have this wonderful new look, except for the MDI windows. Microsoft decided that they wanted to ignore that. Basically, they've fallen out of love with an MDI interface. If you look at all their latest software, well, not all of it, because some of it still has bad-looking MDI clients in it, but most of their latest software, they've just gotten away from MDI completely, so they never went and actually made it work completely in Windows 10. So they didn't do a good job of it. They're leaving it behind. Rather than fight this, there's nothing we can really do. It's Windows doing the client there. So we just decided we're going to bring in a new concept. We'll actually reintroduce an old concept of tabbed workspaces, and John's going to talk about that tomorrow at 11 o'clock. So there are some code changes that are involved. Are you going to, I guess, John, are you going to actually show what you have to do to bring in the code? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because he'll show you the code later. But there are a couple of code changes, but we've tried to make it as automatic as it can be so that you can use it as easily as possible. These changes have brought in a new look for all the tools. If you look at the Studio, if you look at Database Explorer, you look at Database Builder, they all have a new look. They all have the new high DPI support. Everything's been replaced with nice flat icons. We have a lot of images in the product. We found that out. You forget all of the little icons that are all over the Studio and things like that. Made all new versions of those, updated our theme. So you'll see a whole new look in the product everywhere. Speaking of, a good example of this is take a look at the latest Database Explorer. Database Explorer has some really nice new features, logging. I think that was a suggestion from, I think that might have been Triumph, might have been that suggested that, but that was something that Vincent brought in. Supports managed connections, more information about the back end, so that when you're in Database Explorer and you're connected to SQL data, you're seeing a lot more information that's giving you the context of what you're connected to. He took all the grids and lists throughout the whole Database Explorer and replaced them with the new ones. They have really nice features in it, improved filtering. It just feels more modern. It's more capable. Vincent's been a very, very busy young man. I believe he's here somewhere. Where's Vincent? There he is. So you can buy him a beer. He's here. And then he'll go back home and then buy one for Martin. The web framework. Server web properties is a big deal in the new web framework. When you look at web properties, they basically, it started out as web properties are what you have to send to the device, to the client, to tell it what to do, to tell it how to render its controls, do things like that. Well, what happened was we started sending more information via web properties that the client didn't necessarily really need. So the next thing was, okay, well, how do we not send that information over? Partially because it could be a security risk, but also just because it's unnecessary. Why send things over the wire that you don't have to send? So, over the the wire, the Ethernet, the internet. So web properties, server web properties solve that. Harm has a session that he's going to show you how easy it is to do that a little later today. There's a lot of new web controls for the mobile interface. Color picker, list menus, floating columns, swipe buttons are really setting people on fire because now all of a sudden they can do things with lists and swipes and cards and swipes. Again, Harm is going to show you how to bring those into your application. The web app server itself, 64-bit support for the server. So one of the things you used to have to do, actually it all just comes down to making it easier to deploy the server. You didn't want to have to set up 32-bit application pools anymore, so now that the server runs at 64-bit, that goes by the wayside. The administrator allows you to easily deploy to not just the default server, the default application pool. And there's a whole new command line interface for setting up all of those aspects of deploying an app so you can easily, within your own installation scripts, get your workspace out there, use the new command line interface, and not have to worry about going into the administrator or anything like that, or knowing kind of the low-level stuff. It's all easy to do with the command line interface. And I'm going to talk about that a little more. One of the things that we did to get 64-bit support was kind of a cascading of benefits because we wanted to make sure that we got rid of the 32-bit application pools. And so we went in there and we made the 64-bit versions of the executables. The ISAPI handler switches automatically, so you don't have to worry about, oh, do I need 32-bit, do I need 64-bit? It just knows, oh, use 64-bit, I'll send you to these executables, 32 over here. To do that, we needed to use IIS-7, and so in using IIS-7, we decided, basically you didn't have to use the IIS-6 metabase interface anymore, so that's two things that you don't have to set when you deploy a server anymore. You don't have to set up IIS-6 metabase, and you don't have to set up 32-bit. Command line interface allows you to control all that. I'm going to do a deployment session, and we're going to actually do an example of that. And last, the runtime JSON parser. Basically, the runtime JSON parser was an offshoot of going after server web properties. So to do server web properties, we decided that we needed the ability to take DataFlex of any type and complexity and convert it to JSON, and then take a JSON of any type and convert it back into DataFlex. So we did that. And we wanted to make it fast, so we put it in the runtime. And as long as we did that, we decided, well, we won't just hide it in the runtime, we'll let you guys use it too. And as long as we did that, it was like, well, okay, if we just add a little bit more work, we can make a full JSON parser out of it. So it's just kind of one of those things where now you have a full JSON parser. And Harm will talk about how you put that to work. In looking at JSON and DataFlex, it's not just the parser. A lot of people forget that web services are built on top of JSON. They started way back in the day as built on top of SOAP, but then over time, JSON came in, it started basically coming on the inflow, and then the outflow was added in 17, and it just more and more matured that now there's basically full JSON support everywhere in web services. You've got the new CJSON object, which is going to give you your parsing capabilities, and then there's also a new JSON HTTP transfer class that allows you to communicate with JSON services. So it's everywhere in the product now, you have this access through to JSON. Timeline. What are we doing? Well, this is what the timeline looks like. We first gave you a peek at what we were doing with the connectivity changes just in September, not that long ago. We released the alpha in January, the beta just last month, and our target for release is this summer. And basically as soon as possible. So the more you work with the beta and get us your feedback, because basically now that we're in beta, we're in a mode of addressing bugs, because yeah, we get a few bugs in from time to time, and working on documentation. And as soon as it's stable enough, and as soon as the documentation is done, we're going to get it into your hands as fast as we can. So, what am I doing time-wise? What's the time like? Good. One of the things that I started off with is I told you that if you were in one of the the day-long training classes, you would have done all this wonderful stuff. And some of you, a lot of you weren't in that class, so I thought maybe I could show you what you would have ended up with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the studio and then exit because I need to make sure that I have administrator rights to set up the new web app. That is the new look and feel of the studio, by the way. You can see the new dashboard, all the flat look. And so what they started with is this little script right here. So basically, remember I said they connected to an SQL database and then they created a whole application. So if I run this script, because I don't have this database, I got this from Harm this morning. So this is the finished. So it's going to bring up SQL Management Studio. Here's my script. It's going to create something called Chinook Finished. Just to show you one of the nice things about how the managed connections work, I don't like Chinook Finished as a name, so I'm going to name it something else just to see how easy it is to do that. So I'll do a quick replace. I'll name my report. I'll name it all John Toohey. It won't work? It'll work, it'll just go a little slower. Oh, sorry. So I've got this script now that's going to create a SQL database called John Toohey, and I'll execute it. And it says it was successful, so maybe it's not that bad, John. And I look over here, and hey, sure enough, there's a John Toohey database, and it's got tables. It even looks like a whole web app. There's all of the SQL tables that were there. There's the web app server property table. There's code mask and code type. So, all right, I have a database now. It's called John Toohey. I want to make sure real quick that my web app can actually access that database. So I'm just going to go over here to my logins, because web app runs under the system administrator account. So I'm just going to make sure that John Toohey is properly mapped. Oh, he already is mapped. It remembered from the last time I did this. So now I've got that. I have a database. I have this workspace that Harm sent me. And I am canceling that because it's pointing back at another database that I don't have anymore. But what I want to do is bring up my connection here. I want to edit that and point it to John. And see if that works now. It says fine. Save it. And my web app isn't registered, so I want to go in here. Oh, I forgot to run it at administrator rights. Let's say open the workspace again. That's better. So remember, this was sent to me as Chinook Finished, and I might have had that already registered or whatever, but I like it better as John Toohey. I don't have to change the name, but I'm going to. Change that to John Toohey. John Toohey. Should be fine. Compile it. Run it. What's the password for guest? Is it uppercase? So that is the web app that they created in a little under a day. Well, it's 6 hours of time. You've got artist queries. You can see for an artist. You can go back. Remember, we talked about that search engine that they created with an SQL view. There's the search engine. It includes highlighting. Oh, one of the things that I want to show you, because I'm not on a mobile device here, is let's make it look like a mobile device. So which view is the swipe in, Harm? So when you've got the tracks, you can now swipe on the control and go look at the album that belongs to that. So they connected to a database they had never connected to before. They described that database to their workspace environment. They created business rules. They created all the different views. They put in swiping controls. They created an SQL view. They integrated that SQL view into a search engine that goes out and searches all the different things and ranks them in the order of their importance. And they did that all in a day. And I got it working on my machine in, what, 2 minutes? Even though I never had the database and I never had the web app hooked up. And that's what 19.0 and Managed Connections and the web framework can do for you. Thank you.